I kissed him before I even realized what I'd done. It was one of those moments where your body moves before your brain catches up. His cologne, that specific cedar and smoke smell I'd spent 4 months associating with safety, with home, with Jonah. And then his hands were on my shoulders, gently pushing me back, and I looked up and saw a stranger wearing my boyfriend's face. "Wrong one," he said. "Not sorry, not excuse me. Just, wrong one," with a half smile that told me he wasn't even remotely surprised. That was the night everything I thought I understood about myself turned out to be wrong. Let me back up, because if I start there you'll think I'm the villain of this story. Maybe I am. I've spent a long time sitting with that possibility. But I think the truth is messier than villain or victim, and I think you deserve the whole thing. My name is Sloane. I'm 28 years old. I was, at the time of all this, a second-year resident in emergency medicine at a hospital in Chicago. Overworked, chronically underslept, surviving on vending machine coffee, and the particular kind of emotional numbness that residency either builds into you or breaks you trying. I didn't have space in my life for anything complicated. Jonah Voss had seemed like the uncomplicated choice. We met at a friend's birthday dinner in October, about 6 months before everything happened. He was warm the way some people just are. Not performatively warm, not trying to charm anyone, just genuinely interested in whatever you were saying. He asked follow-up questions. He laughed at things that were actually funny. He texted back in full sentences. In my world, a world of people who communicated exclusively in 48-hour silences and lol, Jonah felt like fresh air. We fell into each other slowly, dinners that ran too long, late-night calls where neither of us wanted to hang up first. By December I had a drawer at his apartment, and strong feelings I was doing a very poor job of pretending we're casual. He was a landscape architect. He designed parks. Actual parks, the kind families use on Saturdays. I thought about that a lot. That while I was elbow-deep in the worst moments of strangers' lives, Jonah was somewhere making places where people could breathe. There was something about that contrast that made me feel like we fit together. He told me about his family carefully, and in pieces the way you do when your family is complicated. His parents were Greek-American. His mother, Irene, had grown up in Thessaloniki before immigrating in the 80s. His father, George, was second generation, born in Queens. They'd built a landscaping company together and then sold it when Jonah was in college. Now they were in semi-retirement in a big house in the western suburbs, and family dinners were apparently an institution, held every few weeks, heavily attended, heavily felt. "My dad can be a lot," Jonah said once, carefully. "How much is a lot? He has opinions about everything, sports, politics, whether you're using the right kind of olive oil." He paused. "He loves hard, though, just loudly." I said that was fine, I meant it. What he didn't tell me, what he waited until mid-March to tell me, 4 months in, right before he invited me to one of these dinners, was that he had a twin brother. Not just a brother, a twin, identical. "You have a twin," I said. "An identical twin." "Technically, yes, Jonah, I know. I should have mentioned it sooner." He had the grace to look sheepish. It gets weird when I bring it up. People get curious about the wrong things. And he's a lot to explain. Fen. Short for Fenwick, apparently. A family name on their mother's side, the kind of old-world name that on paper sounds absurd and in person manages to sound inevitable. Jonah was the younger twin by 4 minutes. Fen was the older one, and by all accounts had never let anyone forget it. Where Jonah had become a landscape architect, Fen had gone into real estate development, the high-stakes, high-rise kind. By 31 he ran his own firm, mostly commercial properties in Chicago and occasionally New York, and had a reputation in certain circles for being brilliant and difficult in roughly equal measure. His name turned up in business articles sometimes. He had no social media presence, which in my experience meant either you had nothing to hide or you had too much. "Are you close?" I asked. Jonah thought about it for a moment too long. "We're brothers," he said finally. I filed that away and told myself it wasn't important. The dinner was set for a Saturday in late March, the kind of early spring day that Chicago delivers as a cruel joke, where it's technically 44 degrees and technically sunny, and you step outside, and the wind off the lake takes your breath away and reminds you that the city doesn't care about your plans. I wore a green dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, and immediately second-guessed the entire drive out there. Too much? Too little? I'd been on my feet for a 60-hour stretch earlier that week. I'd also misplaced my good earrings. I was not at my most composed. Jonah squeezed my hand when we pulled into the driveway. "They're going to love you," he said. "You're just saying that. My mom already loves you." I showed her a picture and she said you had a kind face. That could mean anything. In Greek mom language, it means she's already planning where to seat you at Christmas. I laughed in spite of myself and followed him inside. The house was exactly what I'd imagined. Full, loud, warm, smelling like olive oil and oregano, and something sweet I couldn't identify. Jonah's mother, Irene, wrapped me in a hug before he'd even finished introducing us. His father, George, shook my hand with both of his and told me I looked too skinny and that we'd fix that tonight. Two of his aunts were already in the kitchen arguing about something. A cousin, approximately 7 years old, barreled past me without acknowledging my existence. I loved it immediately. I hadn't grown up in a family like this. Mine was smaller, quieter, the kind where nobody argues because nobody talks about anything real. Being dropped into this felt like walking into a room with all the windows open. For a while Fen wasn't there. I almost forgot to be nervous about him. Then he walked in. And here is the part where I have to be precise, because the details matter, and I've replayed this so many times that I want to get it exactly right. The kitchen and the dining room were open plan, connected by a wide archway. I was standing at the counter talking to Jonah's Aunt Theodora about the difference between working in the ER versus a regular practice. Theodora's daughter was a nurse. We'd found common ground, and I had my back mostly to the archway. Jonah had stepped away a few minutes earlier to help his dad carry something in from the garage. I had a glass of wine in my hand. I was slightly more relaxed than I'd been in weeks. I heard the front door. I heard Irene's voice pitch up slightly in welcome. I turned, not thinking, just turning, and I saw across the open-plan space someone who moved like Jonah, had Jonah's jaw and Jonah's shoulders, wearing a dark jacket over a white shirt, and he was already walking toward me the way Jonah sometimes did when he spotted me in a crowd, with that slight momentum of intention, and I thought, he came back early. Why didn't he say anything? My feet moved before my brain did. I crossed the space. I reached up, the way I always did. He was taller than me, and I kissed him on the cheek, my hand on his arm, the way you do with someone who is yours, someone familiar, the easy physical shorthand of 4 months. His hands came to my shoulders. He stepped back, and I looked up at a face that was Jonah's and was not Jonah's, and I understood all at once that I had made a very serious mistake. The silence between us lasted approximately 1 second. It felt much longer. "Wrong one," he said. Quiet, almost amused. His eyes, darker than Jonah's somehow, or maybe just reading differently, stayed on my face without flinching. I stepped back so fast I nearly knocked into the counter behind me. "I'm so sorry," I thought. I didn't. My face was on fire. "I thought you were Jonah, clearly." He wasn't smiling exactly. It was something more contained than a smile. "Fen," he said, and extended his hand with the kind of calm that felt almost pointed. "And you must be Sloane." Yes, I'm so sorry." "Don't be." He said it like it was nothing. Like I hadn't just kissed him in front of his entire family. "He didn't warn you. He mentioned you." "He didn't." I was still gathering myself. "He didn't tell me you were identical." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise. More like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "Of course he didn't," he said, and there was a layer to it I couldn't fully read, and then Jonah was coming through from the dining room and the moment broke apart. "Fen, you made it." And then Jonah saw my face, and his face changed. What happened? I will give Fen credit for this. He didn't make it worse. He said simply that I'd mistaken him for Jonah, that it was an easy mistake, that it was done. He said it all without any visible enjoyment, just stating facts. If Irene or Theodora or anyone else in the kitchen had seen the actual moment, they were kind enough not to perform it back at me. But I felt Jonah's arm around me tighten slightly, and I felt, across the space, Fen settle into a chair at the far end of the table and reach for his water glass, and his eyes moved to me for just a second before moving away. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was embarrassed and reading too much into everything. I was not reading too much into everything. Dinner was long and full, and I slowly unfroze as it went on. George had strong feelings about the Bulls' current season. Irene served more food than 12 people could finish, and seemed happiest when everyone's plate was full. The aunts had resolved their earlier argument and were now united in their conviction that the cousin's new husband was fine, but I was asked questions I could answer, and some I couldn't, and overall I felt, by the end of the main course, that I was doing okay. Fen sat across and 2 seats down from me. He was quieter than I'd expected, or maybe quieter than his reputation had suggested. He answered when spoken to. He listened more than he talked. When George got loud about something, Fen's expression stayed neutral, patient, the face of someone who had been in this room many times and knew how to hold still inside it. He caught me looking at him once. I looked away immediately. When I looked back, carefully, he was listening to something his father was saying, and his expression hadn't changed. After dinner, the table redistributed itself the way big family gatherings do. Some people drifted to the living room, some stayed at the table. The kids who'd been eating in the next room migrated in for dessert chaos. I ended up outside on the back porch with Jonah and his cousin Patrick and his wife Mel, and we stood in the cold with our jackets on and a shared bottle of wine, and I started to feel normal again. Jonah kissed my temple at one point and said, "You're doing great." "I kissed your brother on the face," I said, "in front of your mother." She thought it was funny. She was very polite about it. He laughed. "She texted me. She said you were charming and she couldn't wait to have you back." He paused. Also, that Fen looked startled, which means she absolutely saw it and is enjoying having information. I groaned. He laughed more. I let him. What I didn't tell him, what I wasn't ready to name even to myself, was that for a split second in there before my brain had caught up, I hadn't felt anything wrong. The familiarity of reaching for Fen had felt exactly like the familiarity of reaching for Jonah. Same height, same build, same cedar and smoke smell. Apparently they used the same products, or had the same skin chemistry. I never figured out which. And in that one unguarded second, nothing had felt off. I kept that part to myself. I buried it under embarrassment and moved on. That should have been the end of it. One awkward moment, family dinner, funny story for later. But Fen's firm had recently bought a building 2 blocks from the hospital where I worked, and they were doing commercial renovations on the ground floor. And Chicago is apparently a city of 6 million people, with the social geography of a small town. Because over the next 6 weeks, I ran into Fenwick Voss 4 times. The first was at the coffee shop I stopped at every morning before my shift. He was in line ahead of me. We both acknowledged it with a nod and separate conversations and went about our lives. The second was at a networking event for hospital-adjacent professionals that a colleague dragged me to. He was there because one of his buildings housed a medical practice. We ended up at the same high-top table for approximately 20 minutes. He asked about emergency medicine with what seemed like genuine curiosity. He didn't bring up the dinner. The third was when his building's renovation triggered a small fire alarm. Nothing real, a wiring issue, and 3 of his workers ended up in our ER with minor smoke inhalation. He came in with them. He stood in the waiting room in a hard hat with his jacket dusty, looking completely incongruous, and when I came out to update him, he said, "I hope this isn't becoming a pattern." And for some reason I laughed. "The 4th time we got coffee?" he asked. I said yes without thinking about it, and then spent the entire walk to the counter thinking about why I'd said yes without thinking about it. Here is what I learned about Fen Voss over 45 minutes and 2 cups of coffee. He was not what his reputation suggested. The difficult part, sure, I could see that he had opinions and he didn't soften them. But the brilliant part was quieter and more interesting than I'd expected. He read constantly, fiction mostly, which surprised me. He had 0 patience for pretension and a specific contempt for people who scheduled meetings to plan other meetings. He'd wanted to be an architect as a kid. Buildings, he said. Actual buildings, not green spaces, no offense to Jonah, but had pivoted to development in college because he was better at seeing systems than structures. I told him about why I went into emergency medicine. He listened the same way he did at his family's dinner table. Still, genuinely, not waiting for his turn to speak. Walking back to the hospital, I thought about how different he was from how I'd expected, and then I thought about how that thought shouldn't be occupying as much space as it was. I didn't tell Jonah about the coffee. I told myself it wasn't worth bringing up. A chance run in, a cup of coffee, completely ordinary. I knew, even then, that I was not being honest with myself. The Voss family had a beach house on Lake Michigan. a place they'd been going to for 30 years, the kind of house full of mismatched furniture and a porch that creaked, and nobody wanted to renovate because the imperfection was the point. Memorial Day weekend, Jonah's parents invited us up. There would be a crowd, cousins and aunts and friends who'd become family over the decades. Fen would be there. I told myself I was fine. We arrived Friday evening. The house smelled like lake water, and someone's good grill work, and the specific dusty comfort of a place that's been loved for a long time. I helped Irene with the salads and let George explain to me, in more detail than I required, why the current Bulls roster made him physically upset, and I felt genuinely happy to be there. Fen arrived Saturday morning. He came in through the back porch while I was sitting alone on the steps with my coffee, my first quiet moment in 24 hours. I hadn't heard anyone coming. He almost walked into me. "Sorry," he said. He wasn't quite, but he said it. "You're fine," I said. He sat down on the step above me. Not because I'd invited him to, just because it was clearly the natural place to sit, and we stayed there for a little while in a silence that should have been awkward and wasn't. "How's the building?" I asked finally. No more false alarms. A pause. "How's the ER?" 3 people came in yesterday convinced they were having heart attacks, and were all, separately, having panic attacks. One of them, once we figured it out, was embarrassed. One of them cried. One of them got angry at me personally. Which response do you understand the most? I thought about it. The crying one. The body genuinely can't tell the difference sometimes. It's terrifying. He nodded. Just nodded, like that made sense to him. "What do you do when it's over?" he asked. "When you go home after a shift like that?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. Jonah usually said rough day. Babin ordered takeout and turned on something streaming, which was fine, which I appreciated, which was not the same as being asked this particular question. "I drive home with the windows down," I said. "Even when it's cold, I need the air." I paused. "Sometimes I sit in my car in the parking garage for a few minutes before I go in. Just transitioning." He was quiet for a second. Then, "That makes sense." We stayed on the steps until Irene called us both in for breakfast, and I stood up and walked inside, telling myself nothing had happened. Because technically nothing had. We'd just talked. But something in me had shifted, and I knew it, and I couldn't unknow it. Sunday was the hard day. There was a bonfire on the beach in the evening, the whole extended group of them sprawled across chairs and blankets and sand. Someone had a speaker. The kids were running in the dark at the edge of the water, and everyone was pretending not to worry about them, while very carefully watching them. Jonah fell asleep in his chair somewhere around 9:30. He did that. Not a flaw, just a fact. He'd had a long week, and his body took what it needed. He was asleep with his head tipped back and a half-finished beer in his hand. And I should have been charmed, and I was charmed. And I was also sitting next to him, feeling something I couldn't name pressing against my ribs. Fen was across the fire. He was talking to Patrick about something business-related, occasional words carried over. Zoning, feasibility, the city's process. At some point, Patrick's wife called him away, and Fen went quiet and looked into the fire. I don't know how long we were both just looking at the fire before he looked up and across it at me. He didn't look away. Neither did I. That was the problem. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. It felt geologically long. He stood up, eventually, and walked around the fire toward the water, hands in his pockets, and I thought, okay. That was nothing. That was 2 people looking in the same direction, and I'm sleep-deprived and being insane. And then, because I am apparently a person with excellent bad instincts, I stood up and followed him. We walked far enough down the beach that the bonfire was aglow behind us. The voices softened into distance. The lake was very dark and very present. We stood a few feet apart, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "I need you to tell me something," I said finally. "That depends on what it is." "At the dinner. Back in March, I made myself look at him. You said wrong one like you already expected something, like you weren't surprised." He was quiet for a beat. "Jonah talks to me. More than you'd think, given everything. What did he say? That he'd met someone. That she was remarkable." A pause. He said it the way people say things they're a little afraid of. I felt something cold that wasn't the wind. "Fen, I know," he said, quietly, no edge to it. "I'm with Jonah. I know that too, and I should go back up there." "Yes," he said. "You should." Neither of us moved for a moment that stretched past comfortable, past excusable. The lake made its sound. The bonfire glow pulsed faintly behind us. "This isn't something I do," I said, and I meant it. Whatever this was, this pull, this specific attention I'd been refusing to name, it ran against everything I thought I knew about who I was. I believed in choosing people. I believed in deciding to love someone and then doing the work. I had never been someone who let feelings become justifications. "I didn't think you were," he said. "Then why?" I stopped. He turned to look at me, and his face in the dark was almost Jonah's face, and I understood, standing there, that the familiarity I'd been calling love might have been something else all along. Not a lie, not nothing, but a version of safe that I'd mistaken for the real thing. "I'm going back," I said. "Okay," he said. I walked up the beach. I sat back down next to Jonah. I didn't look back. I broke up with Jonah 3 weeks later. Not because of Fen. I need to be precise about that, the way I've had to be precise about everything. I didn't break up with Jonah to be with someone else. I broke up with him because standing on that beach I'd understood something real. That I had been with him for the ease of him, for the warmth he projected, for the particular relief of someone uncomplicated in a life that was everything but. I had called that love, and it wasn't fair to either of us. I told him that, as much of it as I could. Not the beach, not Fen's name, but the truth underneath it. He was quiet for a long time. He was not cruel. He said finally, "I think I knew something was off. I didn't want to look at it." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm really, truly sorry. I know you are." He rubbed his face. "I don't think sorry fixes much right now, but I believe you mean it." I do. That conversation is one I'll carry for a long time. I didn't see Fen for 2 months after that, not by accident, by choice, mine and probably his. I threw myself back into residency, into 60-hour weeks and the particular mercy of being too tired to think. I called my mom more than usual. I ran, badly and reluctantly, because a colleague had told me it helped and she'd been right. He texted once about 6 weeks in. "Just heard about you and Jonah. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. I typed and deleted 4 responses. I sent, "Thank you, that was it," for another month. Then he called. It was 11 at night, which for me was mid-evening by resident standards, and I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number until it resolved into his name on the 3rd ring. "Hi," I said. "Hi," he said. "Is this a terrible time?" "No, I wanted to call instead of text. Texts are, I'm bad at them. I've noticed." A pause. "How are you actually doing?" And something about being asked that directly with no buffer, by a voice I recognized. I laughed, a little raggedly. "I'm honestly not sure. Better than I was. Different than before. Different is usually better than the alternative."
Yeah!
We talked for a long time. Not about Jonah, not directly. About work. About what it felt like to be in the middle of something hard and not be able to see the other side of it. He was in the middle of something too. A development deal gone complicated. Months of his life poured into a project that a city council vote might undo. He talked about it without self-pity and with the specific frustration of someone who cared deeply about the work. "Why that building?" I asked. "Why does it matter that much? It's going to house 3 nonprofits and a community health clinic in a neighborhood that doesn't have one." A pause. "The profitable part is the top floors. But the point is the ground floor." I thought about parks. About Jonah designing green spaces for families. I thought about how the 2 brothers had made completely different shapes with the same starting materials. And both shapes had the same thing at the center. "You should have been an architect," I said. "I still think like one," he said. "I just work bigger." I was smiling when I went to sleep that night, and I knew, not hoping, not wondering, knowing, that something had turned. We were careful. That's the part the story doesn't always include, but I want it in here. We were careful. We didn't see each other in person for another month after that call. We talked on the phone. We let something build at a pace that felt deliberate rather than reckless. When we finally had dinner, a real dinner, a Tuesday night in June, at a place we both had to drive slightly out of our way to get to, which felt like the right amount of intentionality, it was both easier and more nerve-wracking than anything I'd experienced in a long time. He ordered without looking at the menu. I changed my order twice. We talked for 3 hours and the server had to ask us to close out twice before we noticed. Walking back to our cars, he said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay. When you showed up at that dinner in March," he stopped walking. "I knew who you were, from what Jonah had told me. And then you crossed that room and He paused. I should have stepped back faster. I didn't. That's mine to own. I looked at him. You didn't do anything wrong. I didn't stop it. It was a second and a half. Yeah, he exhaled. I know, but I've thought about it. So have I said. I've thought about a lot of things. And I keep coming back to the same place, which is that I think something real takes time to trust, I said. I don't want to rush this because of how we started. I want to actually know you. He looked at me for a long moment. That's what I want too. He didn't kiss me that night. He said goodnight the same way someone does when they're being careful with something they don't want to break. And I drove home with the windows down in the warm June air, and I thought, this is different. This is the real thing. It has been 8 months since that dinner. Jonah and I don't speak, which I understand and don't blame him for. His mother sends me a text occasionally, just small things, a recipe she mentioned I'd like, a note when something good happened. I answer everyone. I think she is a remarkable woman, and I think she sees things most people miss. Fen and I are not easy, exactly. Easy wasn't the point. He has opinions. I have opinions. We disagree about things, sometimes loudly, and then figure out what we actually think. He works too much, and so do I. And we have had more than one conversation about what it means to build a life alongside someone else's relentless ambition when you have your own. But he asks me how I'm doing, after bad shifts, and he means it. He remembers what I've told him. He doesn't try to solve things that don't need solving. He just sits in it with me, the way we sat on those steps at the lake house with our coffee. 2 people who knew how to be quiet together. I still think about the moment on the beach sometimes. Not with guilt. I've made my peace with that, or most of it, but with a kind of wonder at the strangeness of how things begin. How your body moves before your brain catches up. How a moment of pure reflex can open a door you didn't know was there. I kissed the wrong brother on the face in front of his entire family. It turned out to be the most honest thing I'd done in months.